can still hear the suitcase wheels on the old pine floorboards, each rattle a countdown I didn't know I was listening to. Our cottage in Gulhaven wore the smell of salt and soap that night, the windows sweating with the fog rolling off the harbor. Mira was asleep in her crib, one small hand flung over her head like a flag claiming peaceful territory. The kettle wailed, then clicked off, and the world, for a heartbeat, held its breath with the ocean. "Lucas," I called, because love makes you say people's names as if pronunciation alone could anchor them. No answer. I padded barefoot through the living room, lights off, the gray of the mist turning every shape into a suggestion. The front door was open a crack. Not enough for a gasp, just enough for a decision. On the kitchen table lay a single mug of coffee, still steaming. Next to it, a folded note with my name and a damp ring staining the ink, as if the page had been crying too. My blood ran cold before I touched it. I already knew. Some truths leap ahead of our fingers. I unfolded the paper, expecting the sorry little clichés of cowards. I was not prepared for the precise, clipped sentences that smelled like someone else's perfume. "I'm sorry. I need something different. Don't wait up. L. I need something different." The words detonated in my chest, soundless and total, as if the room had been vacuum sealed. The air around me tightened, and for a second I saw myself from above. A woman standing in a kitchen she had scrubbed and painted and paid for with grocery store coupons and short nights, holding a piece of paper that had just cut her life in half. Outside, the harbor hoisted another foghorn. I stepped onto the porch, feeling the sting of October drizzle. Down the lane, under the bent street lamp, Lucas was a darker shape moving toward a waiting car. The driver's door opened. A woman leaned out, black hair like a spill of midnight, eyes catching the streetlight, a flash like a camera capturing my humiliation. She was new to the town. I'd seen her once at the fishmonger's, asking too many questions in a velvet voice. "Lucas," I called again because grief is a reflex. He didn't turn. The woman lifted one hand in a calm, proprietary hello, the sort you give someone you've already won from themselves. Then they were in the car, red taillights streaming through the mist, and the town swallowed them the way seafoam eats footprints. I stood there, soaked, with a kernel of anger warming in my frozen center, because it wasn't only about him leaving. It was about the particular violence of leaving me here, with bills lined up like a jury on the mantle, with a daughter whose laugh could split my heart open with joy, with a life he had promised to build, and then quietly dismantled like a stage set after the audience goes home. Inside, the kettle had cooled. The clock resumed its soft, indifferent tick. I went to Mira's crib and pressed my ear to her tiny chest, listening for the steady, stubborn drum that would keep me moving whether I wanted to or not. I could stop later. I could fall apart later. Mothers bank their collapses for when it's safe. On the table, beneath the note, something else glinted. The brass key to the old cannery lofts. Lucas's studio. He'd worked there since spring, when he said he'd landed a contract doing logistics for the foundation that kept the town running. I'd always thought that phrase sounded like a confession. Now it sounded like a threat. A gull screamed somewhere in the dark, a sound like laughter sharpened to a blade. I stepped back onto the porch and looked down the hill to where the ocean was a black lunging thing, relentless and ancient, as if it knew the exact weight of a single broken heart, and considered it, generously, negligible. I folded the note back over itself and slid it into the pocket of my robe. I wiped the counter until the damp ring disappeared. I checked the locks. I kissed my daughter again. The ordinary motions of survival clicked into place one after another, the way a train couples its cars before pulling into the long night. I didn't cry. Not yet. Grief has a schedule, and mine had another appointment first. The ocean's pause was ending, and my life was about to move with it, because a woman had just driven away with my husband. And what I didn't know then, what the fog was mercifully hiding, was that she hadn't come only for him. The night settled on the house like a verdict. I whispered to Mira, to myself, to whatever was listening. Okay, it wasn't consent. It was promise. It was the first word of the rest of my life, but the worst was yet to come. If you are listening to me now, if some part of your chest is tight and hot and familiar, know this. I didn't wake up wanting to be a story. I wanted to be an ordinary wife, in an ordinary cottage where the gutter squeaked when the wind had opinions and the kettle scolded every morning. I wanted a life with receipts and leftovers and naps on the couch to a show we'd both pretend to like. My name is Elena Hart, though the town still remembers my maiden name, Rivera, when it wants to make me small. I live in Gulhaven, an Oregon harbor town that pretends to be quaint, while dealing in secrets like a currency. We all owe, and we all collect. I met Lucas at the St. Bridget's benefit, where the church auctioned off baskets no one needed and hope no one could afford. He flirted with the priest flirted back. Everyone flirted with belonging. Lucas had that weathered charisma of men who are always about to leave. He made it feel like an adventure. When he leaned across the folding table to ask my name, I laughed too hard and said Elena, as if I'd just discovered it. A month later, we were walking the docks, eating paper cups of chowder and telling each other about our future, as if it were already a shared address. He said he'd handle the planning. I said I'd handle the faith. Mira arrived too soon and right on time. She came with colic and stare-downs that looked like suspicion of the world and acceptance of me. Lucas lost his job at Port Authority, for reasons that weren't mine to know, and then he didn't. He had a way of falling upward that I admired until I realized I was the ground. When he announced he'd taken a contract with the Gullhaven Foundation, compliance and shipping logistics, I told myself that fancy words were the scaffolding of stability. At first our bills agreed. Our cottage was an exhale at the end of a narrow lane called Fortuna, which felt like a dare. Across the street, Mrs. Klein watched the world through her petunias, like a second set of police. At the corner, the Salt and Ember Cafe served almond croissants that could make you forget you were a person and become briefly just a mouth. The owners were a couple, Tasha and Helene, two women who ran the place like a ship, and the rest of us like crew. They were my first hires when I returned to work after Mira, the kind of friends who bring extra napkins when you start crying into your muffin and pretend they were always meant for you. There are things I'd rather not admit out loud to you, stranger or friend. I used to iron Lucas's shirts at midnight because it made the mornings feel finished before they began. I ignored the late texts, the shower taken immediately after coming home, the cold smell of travel on his skin when he hadn't left town in days. I called those things shadows. I called myself loyal. And then one cold October night, the shadows got out of the corners and stood in my kitchen, and I did the laundry anyway. If you've stayed with me this far, I know why. We are not fascinated with pain. We are fascinated with survivors, with anyone who can hold a life together by its frayed edges and tie a bow anyway. So let me ask you for something simple and also everything. Stay. Subscribe to this story, to my voice, to the possibility that your own will sound stronger by the end. Tell me where you are watching from, not because it changes the past, but because it braids our present into something that can hold weight. Type your city, your small town, your street that the map forgets. Let me know if the wind where you are is the same kind of insistent. Here is the context the cottage can't hide. After Lucas left, a letter came the next morning from Greybridge Legal Aid, thick and polite, informing me of restructuring of debts and liabilities related to the Hart household. The phrase gelled in my spine like ice, restructuring of debts, as if our marriage were a failing corporation. I made coffee, held Mira on my hip, and read paragraphs like cave walls, running my fingers over them for a way out. The foundation's name appeared 3 times. The old cannery lofts appeared twice. Outstanding, pending, past due. Those words multiplied like fish in summer, and I couldn't catch any with bare hands. I went looking for help in the places that had previously offered comfort: the church, the cafe, the harbor, the shore. At St. Bridget's, I knelt until my knees found their own prayers. Father Mullen said God had a plan. I asked if the plan took into account the price of baby formula. He gave me a food voucher and a story about Job I didn't want. At the Salt and Ember, Tasha slid over a plate I hadn't ordered and said, "Baby, eat first." Helene took Mira to show her the espresso machine until the hiss made her laugh. At the harbor, Captain Rourke pointed at the weather and told me rain didn't care who deserved it. The shore listened, as always, and kept everything it heard. If love is a knowing, then betrayal is an unknowing, an earthquake under your definitions. I would learn, in increments that felt like cuts, that Lucas leaving was not the beginning of my misfortune. It was the end of my illusions. And the woman in the car, the one with midnight hair and camera eyes, she wasn't merely a thief, she was an announcement. We think we're abandoned by a person. Sometimes we're abandoned by the story we thought we were living. There's something else. I promised you answers, and I will keep the ones that are mine to give. The night after he left, I used his brass key to the old cannery lofts. I told myself I was going to pick up his sketchbooks and old invoices to send back when he grew brave enough to ask. I told myself I wasn't spying, but when I pushed the door open, 3rd floor, end of the hall where the windows looked straight out at the harbor. The first thing I noticed wasn't the smell of turpentine and coffee. It was silence, the wrong kind, heavy and coiled. I stepped inside and saw, in the far corner, a locked steel cabinet I had never once seen in his Instagram posts about the freedom of freelance. I put my ear to the cold door like a child listening for secret music. Inside, something shifted. "Lucas?" I whispered. And then I laughed at myself because opening a cabinet to find your missing husband is a kind of madness reserved for grief in the movies. I didn't open it that night. I didn't know how. I didn't know if I dared. Instead, I picked up a folder from the desk labeled in his handwriting, Tides. When I flipped it open, a typed name stared back, Isla Voss, the woman from the car. I shut the folder as if it had bitten me, and I carried it home under my sweater like contraband. You want me to open it for you right now, don't you? You want me to spill everything I saw in those pages. But I am asking you for faith, the way I once gave mine to a man with a nice laugh and secrets like a second language. Stay. Subscribe. Tell me where you are, so when I say harbor, you can imagine your own. Because when I opened that folder, this stopped being a story about a man who left and became a story about a woman who stayed, and what staying cost. And still, though I didn't know it then, the next page would slice deeper. But the worst was yet to come. There are bills that arrive like postcards, cheerful fonts and promises of points, and there are bills that arrive like subpoenas, with fonts that look like they know where you sleep. The envelopes in our mailbox changed overnight, the way skies do before a storm. Final notice glowed red as an accusation. Immediate action required was a drumbeat. My blood ran cold so regularly that my body learned a new temperature. I took odd shifts at the Salt and Ember, early mornings, late closes, wrapping croissants while Mira slept on a pallet in the back office with a lullaby of steam and spoons. Tasha kept a jar by the register labeled Mira's Future and told customers it was for community college or dragon lessons, whichever came first. People are kind in small amounts. The town drizzled generosity like a sauce, pretty but thin. Helene taught me how to stretch a chicken across 3 dinners and how to keep a smile in your voice even when your eyes were red. Survival began to speak through me in sentences that sounded like recipes. Every time I passed the old cannery lofts, its red brick belly and rusted letters watching the harbor, I felt the pull of that locked cabinet. The folder labeled Tides sat in my kitchen drawer under the dish towels like a live wire. When Mira napped, I read. The first pages looked innocuous. Shipping logs, dates, container codes. Then there were photocopies of donation records to the St. Bridget's Foundation, a charity arm with a reputation for saving half the town after the cannery fire years ago. The donations were generous and very, very regular. The amounts lined up with arrival dates of shipments from Glasshouse Logistics, a company I'd only heard Lucas mention once, like a joke he didn't finish. On page 12, the tone changed. A typed memo from I. Voss to L. Hart. Stop using my name in emails to cover your tracks. If you want to fix this, meet me where the gulls don't fly. There was a date. There was a time. There was a place I recognized. The end of Dock 7, beyond the authorized personnel only sign, where the sea churned like a secret. I told myself a dozen stories that made Lucas less guilty. Maybe it was whistleblowing. Maybe it was a weird affair that had spilled into Excel. Maybe he was being framed by the foundation men who smiled too wide at the Chamber of Commerce breakfasts. The truth whistled underneath, a cold tune that sounded like you already know. Then the black SUV started showing up, parked across from the cafe, rolling slowly past our lane. It never stopped. It was a question asked politely, over and over, by men behind dark glass. The first time I saw it, I laughed at myself for dramatic thinking. The second time, my scalp prickled. The third time, I wheeled Mira's stroller into the walk-in fridge at Salt and Ember and realized I was shivering with something that wasn't the cold. Talk to someone, Tasha insisted, her brown eyes hard. Not the priest. Someone who can file things. I went to Greybridge Legal Aid. Adrian Cho, a lawyer with a clean desk and a voice like gentle steel, read through the stack I brought. He paused at the foundation's name and shook his head the way people do when they're deciding how much truth you can bear. We can halt the collections temporarily, he said. But, Elena, whatever your husband was doing, it left footprints. Criminal? I asked, voice small. Dangerous. Adrian didn't answer. He pulled out a card instead. Ms. Delaney from Family Services is going to check in. You want her as a friend. Don't make her a judge. Ms. Delaney arrived at our cottage the next afternoon. hair smooth as a new envelope, questions gentle and spaced. Was I safe? Was Mira safe? Did we have food? Did we have family nearby? I told her yes. Yes, sometimes no. She glanced at the bills on the mantel, at the picture of Lucas laughing in the sun, and returned to her clipboard. When she left, there was a smile in her eyes that didn't touch the corners, and I realized we were both performing a version of concern. Still, she left a handout for a childcare grant and a phone number with a star next to it. I circled the star as if it could light away. The ocean becomes a teacher when you live with it. You learn that everything on the surface is a performance. The real decisions happen underneath. I stood on the pier at Dock 7 at dusk, the gulls cutting the sky into loud pieces. In the distance, the old cannery lofts glowed with lazy amber, a hive after the honey's gone. The memo's time came and went. No Lucas, no Isla, just me and the sound of the tide chewing on wood. I went home, kissed my daughter, and dreamed of a door with a key that kept changing shape. One morning, a box appeared on my porch. Plain cardboard, no return address. Inside, a burner phone, a handwritten note, press 1 at 9 p.m., and a photograph. Lucas at a table in a dim room, his head tilted the way he did when he was trying to be charming. Across from him, Isla Voss, her eyes not soft at all. Between them, a blue binder with a white label, quota relief. I didn't know then what those words would come to mean, only that they were going to hurt. I pressed 1 at 9 p.m., because I am not brave enough to ignore my fate, and not foolish enough to delay it. A voice answered. Not Lucas, not Isla, a man who sounded like a smile made of ice. Mrs. Hart, you have something of ours. I'm sorry, you've got... What your husband took is foundation property. Bring the folder and the key you stole from the loft. You will leave with your home and your child. My blood turned to glass. Who is this? Silence that was not silence at all. The noise of someone choosing. Then, the gulls don't fly where we do. Midnight. Dock 7. I almost called the police. I almost called Father Mullen. I almost called no one and crawled into bed to let the night do its worst. Instead, I called Adrian. He did not say the words I wanted. Will protect you. But he said, if you go, don't go alone. He gave me a second number. It's a reporter. She's been calling about the foundation for months. I told her no, until now. The name he said bloomed cold behind my eyes. Isla Voss. I hung up. I stared at the phone until it became a shape without meaning. I looked at Mira asleep, mouth open, trust relaxed across her face like a veil. I called Isla. A woman answered. Her voice was lower than I remembered, roughened by a secret diet of smoke and deadlines. Elena, she said, using my name like a key. You finally found me. Did you take my husband? The question exploded out of me, hotter and uglier than I meant. Did you take my life? A pause, then a laugh without humor. If I had taken him, you'd have him. And if I had taken your life, you wouldn't be calling me. What do you want? Same as you. The truth, on record. Meet me before you meet them. 11. Behind the cannery. Wear shoes you can run in. She hung up before I could ask her how she knew I owned shoes at all. I stood in the middle of my small kitchen and felt the floor tilt the way boats do when they pivot toward inevitable water. I packed the folder. I took the key. I left a note for Mrs. Klein. If Mira wakes, just sing the alphabet wrong. She thinks it's hilarious. I looked at the door and thought, I am the door now. I am the lock and the hinge and the force that opens it. I stepped into the fog, but the worst was yet to come. Gullhaven wears its storms like wet armor. That night, rain drilled the streets, and wind clawed at the eaves. The cannery's old bones protested, their rust a chorus. I parked 2 blocks away and moved through the alley with my hood up and my heart conducting the weather inside my ribs. Behind the cannery, the river met the sea in a churn that looked like doubt learning to swim. Isla Voss stepped out of a slice of shadow the way a secret learns your name. Up close, she was not the villain of my grief's cartoon. She was tired, beautiful in the ruthless way of mountains, and alert as if the night owed her money. She carried a messenger bag and a scar under her left eye that I hadn't seen in the photograph. Her hair was braided, practical, and her mouth tilted like she'd said too many true things to be forgiven. You brought it, she said, eyes on the folder under my coat. You stole my husband, I said, because my grief still wanted an altar. You gave him away, she answered. Not cruel, just forensic, to a story you liked better than him. She let me be angry. She didn't apologize. Walk, she said, and we did. ankle deep through the slick. She led me to a side door that opened with a key of her own. Inside, the cannery's low-lit belly hummed with machines asleep and secrets awake. The air smelled like brine and old promises. "We have 8 minutes," Isla said, checking her watch. "Then your midnight friends will make their entrance like theater kings." "Who are they?" "The foundation is a circle," she said. "On paper, it's charity and civic pride, playgrounds, scholarships, St. Bridget's roof. Underneath, they buy fishing quotas from dying families for pennies, route them through shell companies, and sell the rights back at 10 times the price to out-of-town operators who gut the bay and move on. Quota relief is the hinge. It looks like salvation. It's foreclosure. And when they needed a logistics arm to move papers and persuade regulators, your husband put on a clean shirt and knocked." "My God," I whispered. The words gelled like ice. "He told me he was doing compliance." "He was," she said, "complying with theft." I wanted to argue, to drown her in the small kindnesses that had once made up our breakfast conversation. But Isla opened her bag and pulled out photographs that made my body go cold and hot and cold again. Copies of bank transfers from Glasshouse Logistics to St. Bridget's Foundation, looping back through a company called Vantage Quota that was registered to a P.O. box, and a man who didn't exist. A spreadsheet of advocacy stipends to councilmen whose smiles I'd shaken hands with. A shot of Lucas exiting a meeting room with a folder labeled Quota Relief, and a grin that looked like a man who had sold his reflection far too cheaply. Then, the picture I couldn't make into paperwork, Lucas holding Mira at the St. Bridget's Fair, cotton candy pinking his fingertips. The dates overlapped on purpose, with a cruelty that felt like design. "You think I did this alone?" she said, reading the question on my face. "I went undercover because no one prints suspicions. We print proof. I needed a man inside who had both access and conscience. I thought your husband had the second. I was wrong." "Then why the car? Why the note? Why did he leave with you?" Isla's mouth hardened. "Because I told him the circle had noticed him. Because I told him to run while I burned the edges. Because he scared easily and looked for the nearest exit that resembled control. He chose the theater of betrayal over the work of confession. He thought leaving made him the author. He's just a page." The door on the far side of the floor opened. Footsteps. Voices. The polite cadence of men who believe stairs bow for them. Isla held up a hand. "Time." She moved like a decision. Swift, prepared. She slid me a small device. "It's recording. Put it in your pocket. Don't speak more than you need. Let them tell you who they are." 2 men entered like rumors wearing suits. One I recognized from chamber breakfasts. Councilman Avery, hair so perfect it cast its own shadow. The other had a face like a used napkin you didn't want to analyze. He smiled with teeth too white for the weather. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "you're punctual. We love punctual." "Where's Lucas?" I asked, my voice steady only because it had to be. "In better hands," the napkin said. "Yours, if you're tidy." Avery glanced at my pocket, and for a heartbeat, I thought the recorder glowed. "The folder," he said, bored. "The key. You're not built for this kind of carrying. Who are you to decide what I'm built for?" The sentence exploded before the caution could muzzle it. "A mother with a mortgage," he said, softening his smile into something like pity. "Don't make the righteous choice. Make the practical one." Behind the stacks of pallets, Isla moved, a line in the dark. She would have to step out soon, or be trapped by the conversation's circumference. I pressed my palm against the recorder just once, as if I could squeeze my wordless courage into it. I handed Avery the key, because this isn't a movie, and sometimes you part with things you want to keep in order to survive. His eyebrows registered pleasure like a temperate climate. Then I held the folder just out of reach. "What happens to Lucas?" I asked. "You'll get a call," the napkin said. "You'll pick him up at the bus stop like a stray dog you've chosen to keep. You'll forgive. He'll mow the lawn. You'll feel safe. That's the American dream. That's why we fund the parade." He reached for the folder. I moved it away. A ridiculous dance. "And what happens if I don't?" He didn't answer. He glanced at Avery, whose smile turned off like a light. Avery nodded toward the river door. "Where gulls don't fly," he said, and my blood ran cold with the echo. "Things sink quickly. People learn. The water is a patient teacher." He stepped closer, and the room shrank to the border of his cologne. "Don't be special, Mrs. Hart. I don't know what possessed me then. Rage, maternal chemistry, or the conspiracy of every woman who has ever decided no in a room where men are used to hearing yes." I tore the folder in half. Paper screamed. The sound startled even me. Avery lunged, grabbing my wrist so hard my bones sang. The recorder bit my palm. In the corner of my eye, Isla appeared, a blade of motion. She slammed into Avery's shoulder with a force that told me she had trained herself for exactly this choreography. He stumbled. The napkin reached for me and caught air. "Run!" Isla hissed. And dear God, I ran. We tore through the side door into rain that slapped, into wind that shoved. The river roared agreement. Behind us, footsteps, cursing, the sound of men whose entitlement had just met an obstacle. Isla shoved the shredded half of the folder into my coat. "It's enough," she said. "Trust me, it's enough. Where's Lucas?" I demanded between breaths that tasted like metal. "Not here," she said. "He wants a deal. He's hiding behind men who don't honor deals." We reached Dock 7. The gulls didn't fly. The storm kept them grounded or wiser. Lights carved the river into jagged knives. A dark shape loomed at the end of the dock. For half a second my heart leaped like a dog. Lucas. And then the shape spoke. Ellie. He used the name only family used. And only when they wanted to rearrange me. Lucas stepped into the light from under the boathouse's roof. He was wet. Handsome in a way that insulted me. And trembling with a cocktail of fear and performance. He looked older. He looked like a decision I had already made for the wrong reasons. "Give them the rest," he said, eyes hungrily on the folder. "Please, they don't want you. They want the paper." "You left," I said. I wanted it to be accusation. It came out like an autopsy report. "I left because they said they would take Mira," he spat. "I left to keep you clear." Isla laughed, low and furious. He left because he sold a piece of himself too many times and there wasn't enough left to stand on. Don't let him invoice you for heroism. "Who the hell are you?" Lucas snarled at Isla, as if he didn't know, as if this was a play, and he was late for rehearsal. "I'm the reason your kid still has a mother tonight," Isla snapped. "Pick a side, Lucas. Pick it fast." Behind Lucas, footsteps again. The napkin and Avery, storm-slick and furious, flanked by two men whose names didn't matter because their fists did. In the moment between options, time stilled its wings. I saw the recorder in my palm as if it were a living thing. I saw my daughter's laugh, the way her hand felt on my cheek. I saw a roof that needed patching, and a town that rewarded silence. I saw myself, a woman on a dock in a storm, about to choose the rest of her life. I stepped backward, letting the shredded half of the folder slip from my coat to the river. It fluttered like a broken bird, then went dark. The men's faces flickered with triumph. Then I held up the recorder. "You already have the paper," I said, my voice suddenly calm, deeper than I remembered it. "But I have your words, and I'm not the only one." "Do you think anyone cares?" Avery asked softly, like a lullaby. "I do," a voice said from the shadows. Adrian Cho stepped into the light with two officers behind him, their jackets dark with rain, their faces set. "And we have probable cause." Everything happened at once. The napkin lunged. Isla pushed me, and I fell hard, breath knocking out. Lucas grabbed my arm, too tight. A lover's grip turned prison. The officers shouted. Avery ran. Someone's elbow found my throat. My vision spiked with white. I heard the recorder crack and felt a cold flood in my pocket that was not water but terror becoming fuel. I bit. I clawed. I became an animal at the gates of my child's name. And then it was quiet. Not in truth, but in me. The center of me went very still, the way it does when you decide. I reached up and pressed my hand to Lucas's cheek. He flinched, and in that flinch I found mercy for myself. "Let go," I said, and it was a spell. He did. He stepped back as if he had been released by a priest he didn't believe in. Adrian's voice cut through the storm. "Councilman Avery, you are under arrest on suspicion of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You," he pointed at the napkin. "Two. Hands where we can see them." The officers moved with hard grace. Isla steadied me with a hand at my back. She was shaking. I realized so was I. "Where gulls don't fly," Isla murmured, staring at the black water. "They were going to put you there. You and the truth." The storm didn't care. The river surged past us, carrying away ash and paper, and the last of my illusions. If this were a different story, perhaps Lucas would have thrown himself into the water in a grand gesture, or confessed in a speech. Instead, he stood there, small and wet and angry, while men with badges turned a circle into a line. I thought it was over. I thought the night had emptied its pockets. That's when Ms. Delaney walked out of the darkness with her clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. "Elena," she said, too smooth. We need to talk about Mira. Something in me howled, but the worst was yet to come. Ms. Delaney would later say she was there in an official capacity, that she had received an anonymous tip about neglect, that she had acted in the best interests of the child. She would never say who called. She would never explain how she arrived at Dock 7 a minute after a crime scene blossomed there. But in that moment, soaked to the bone, I met her eyes and saw not a guardian, but an errand. For whom, I could guess. Not tonight, Adrian said, stepping between us with a lawyer's posture and a brother's fury. You will not weaponize procedure against a woman who just witnessed a felony. Ms. Delaney's smile was clinical. There are concerns. The child is sleeping alone, with a neighbor who has the baby monitor and 2 granddaughters asleep in the next room. Tasha's voice cut in. She materialized out of the rain like a lighthouse, Helene at her shoulder, both of them armed with umbrellas, and a look I will be grateful for until I die. We saw the SUVs and we followed. That's what family does. The night shifted. Where menace had made space small, community widened it. Officers logged evidence. Adrian collected the recorder's battered remains like a relic. Isla took out her phone, eyes hard, and texted a sequence that triggered stories in rooms I couldn't imagine. Lucas sat on a crate like a reprimanded teenager. Everything was still terrible, but it was also, somehow, survivable. They questioned me until my throat was a scrape. They asked me the kind of questions that make you feel both seen and accused. What did you know? When did you know it? Why didn't you call sooner? I told the truth in the clumsy way of the newly brave. I confessed what was mine, and handed back what wasn't. When they asked if I wanted to press charges against my husband, I stared at his face for a long time, and saw not a man, but a door into a room I had already left. Yes, I said, and the word was not revenge. It was a hinge. By dawn, the storm had exhausted itself. Gullhaven looked scrubbed and unrepentant. The cannery sat with its red brick shoulders hunched, as if pretending to be historical could absolve the recent. Avery was processed, the napkin too. The foundation's board went from invincible to suddenly on vacation. Ms. Delaney vanished like fog, and Isla Voss, Isla, who had been the villain of my fear and became the midwife of my truth, stood with me at the edge of the pier, both of us wrapped in borrowed blankets that smelled like other people's houses. I'm not your friend, she said, because kindness makes more sense when you name it. But I am your witness, and I'll print what I have. She lifted her chin at the gray water. They'll say it's an isolated incident. They'll call it a misunderstanding with impressive documentation. They'll donate to someone louder. It will keep happening, but less, because you said no. What if they come for me again? I asked, because fear is a system, not an event. Then you call, she said, and you remember who you were tonight. She left before sunrise, sliding back into the city like a blade into a sheath. Weeks later, her article would explode onto the front page with a headline that turned my stomach.